The rain hit harder the moment my mother slammed the door. I stood there on the front porch of the house I grew up in, two trash bags at my feet, my business notebook tucked under my arm, and nowhere to go. The porch light was still on, warm, bright, mocking. Inside, I could hear my father's voice, low and final. He made his choice. My mother didn't respond. She didn't need to. The deadbolt said everything. If you are watching this, kindly subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. And I hope that you're safe wherever you are. Let's continue. I was 18 years old. I'd asked for 1 year. Just 1 year to build something of my own before college. 1 year to see if the dream I'd been sketching in notebooks since sophomore year could become real. They called it rebellion. I called it survival. And as I picked up those trash bags and walked into the North Carolina night, I realized something that would change everything. The people who were supposed to protect me had just become my first obstacle. My name is Jason Carter, and if you'd asked me 3 days earlier if my parents loved me, I would have said yes without hesitation. But love, I was learning, wasn't the same as control. And control dressed up as concern can look an awful lot like care, until the moment you try to walk a different path. The rain soaked through my hoodie within seconds. Summer storms in Raleigh don't build slowly. They arrive like judgment. The cicadas were already screaming in the trees lining Shadowwood Drive, that high-pitched hum that makes the heat feel heavier than it is. I looked back at the house one more time. Every light was on. The kind of house that makes neighbors think everything inside is perfect. White columns, trimmed hedges, an American flag by the mailbox that my father replaced every 6 months because faded flags, he said, sent the wrong message. The wrong message. That phrase had ruled my entire childhood. Wrong shoes sent the wrong message. Wrong friends sent the wrong message. Wrong grades, wrong hobbies, wrong dreams. All of it measured against what the neighbors might think, what the church might whisper, what Duke University's admissions office might see on my application. But I didn't want Duke. I wanted to build something real, something mine. And that, apparently, was the wrongest message of all. I adjusted the trash bags. One had my clothes, the other had my laptop, a charger, 3 notebooks, and a signed poster of Steve Jobs my best friend Ethan had given me for my birthday. He'd written on the back in Sharpie, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." Ethan believed in me. My parents didn't. And the weight of that realization hit harder than the rain. The argument had lasted 2 days. 2 full days of raised voices, slammed doors, and my mother's tears deployed like weapons every time I tried to explain myself. My father didn't yell as much. He didn't need to. He had this way of looking at you, through you, really, that made you feel small without him saying a word. But on that 3rd morning, they'd had enough. My mother appeared in my doorway at 7 a.m., her face calm in a way that scared me more than anger ever could. "Pack a bag," she said. "If you're going to act like an adult, you're going to live like one." I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. By 8:30, my father had dragged 2 trash bags from the garage and started filling them with my things. Not carefully, not sadly, efficiently, like he was cleaning out a storage unit. "Dad," I said, standing in the doorway, "can we just talk about this?" He didn't look up. "We talked. You didn't listen." "I listened. I just didn't agree." That's when he stopped. He turned to me, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd soften. Maybe he'd remember the kid who used to sit on his lap during Panthers games. The kid who built a lemonade stand in 3rd grade and gave all the profits to the animal shelter because it felt like the right thing to do. But he didn't soften. "You think you're special," he said quietly. "You think the rules don't apply to you. But the real world doesn't care about your ideas, Jason. It cares about credentials. And you just threw yours away." That was the last thing he said to me before my mother walked me to the door. She handed me the bags. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And then She said the words I'd replay in my head every night for the next 5 months. Adults don't get choices they can't handle. She shut the door before I could respond. Now I stood in the rain, soaked and shaking, trying to figure out where someone goes when their own family decides they're disposable. I didn't have a car. I'd been saving for one, but my parents controlled my bank account, something they reminded me of every time I thought about being independent. I had $83 in cash, a phone with 2% battery, and a dream that suddenly felt a lot heavier than it had in my notebooks. Across the street, I saw Mrs. Patterson's living room curtain shift. She was watching. Probably had been watching since the moment I stepped outside. Her face appeared briefly in the window, pale, curious, uncomfortable. And then the curtain dropped. She didn't come outside. Nobody did. Because in neighborhoods like this, you don't intervene. You don't ask questions. You just watch, shake your head, and thank God it's not happening to your family. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stand on that porch any longer. My sneakers squelched against the wet pavement. The trash bags grew heavier with every step, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered the question I'd been avoiding since the moment my mother said the word pack. What if they're right? What if I really was delusional? What if entrepreneurship was just a fantasy I'd convinced myself was real because it sounded better than admitting I was afraid of college, afraid of expectations, afraid of becoming another version of my father, successful, respected, and completely miserable? But then I thought about Ethan. Ethan, who'd spent the last 6 months coding beside me in coffee shops. Ethan, who believed we could build something that mattered. Ethan, who never once called my dreams stupid or unrealistic or embarrassing. I pulled out my phone. 1% battery left. I typed fast. They kicked me out. I don't know where to go. I hit send before the screen went black. The rain kept falling. The cicadas kept screaming. And I kept walking into the darkness, toward a future I couldn't see, built on a dream I wasn't allowed to have, carrying everything I owned in 2 trash bags. Because here's the thing about being punished for ambition. It doesn't kill the dream. It just shows you who was never really on your side to begin with. And as I disappeared into the humid North Carolina night, one thought burned brighter than the rest. If I was going to survive this, I'd have to prove them all wrong. The tent I found was torn. Not in a small way. Not in a way you could patch with duct tape and pretend was temporary. The entire back panel had a gash the size of a basketball, and the zipper on the front door didn't close all the way. But it was free. Leaning against a dumpster behind a sporting goods store on Capitol Boulevard, and free was the only price I could afford. So I took it. Lake Wheeler Park sits on the southern edge of Raleigh, tucked between suburbia and farmland. It's the kind of place families visit on weekends, fishing, picnicking, taking photos by the water. But at night, when the park officially closes and the rangers stop patrolling, it becomes something else, a hiding place. I set up the tent in a cluster of trees about 50 yards from the main trail, close enough to hear cars on the road, but far enough that nobody would notice me unless they were looking. The ground was uneven, roots pressed up through the dirt like bones. But it was shelter, and shelter, I was learning, was a privilege I'd taken for granted my entire life. The first night, I didn't sleep, not because of the heat, though the humidity clung to me like a second skin, not because of the bugs, though the mosquitoes found every exposed inch of skin and feasted. I didn't sleep because every sound felt like a threat. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf, every distant voice made my heart slam against my ribs. What if someone found me? What if the rangers kicked me out? What if my parents drove by and saw me living like this and felt, what? Vindicated? Guilty? Nothing at all? I stared at the torn ceiling of that tent and wondered how someone's life could collapse so completely in 72 hours. By the second day, the practical problems started piling up. Food, water, hygiene, charging my phone. The things you don't think about when you have a house. A kitchen, a bathroom that's always 3 steps away. I had $83. I bought a gallon of water, a loaf of bread, peanut butter, and a pack of batteries for the flashlight Ethan had lent me months ago for a camping trip I'd never gone on. The bread lasted 4 days. The peanut butter, 6. I showered at the 24-hour gym on Western Boulevard, the one with the $10 day pass that I could only afford twice a week. On the other days, I'd wash my face in the park's public restroom and hope nobody noticed the same kid hanging around at weird hours, wearing the same hoodie, carrying the same backpack. Shame is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits in your chest and grows heavier every time you make eye contact with someone who has a home to go to. Every time you see a family loading groceries into their car. Every time you walk past your old high school and wonder if anyone inside knows where you ended up. I started avoiding people, not just classmates, everyone. I'd take the long route to avoid familiar faces. I'd skip meals rather than risk running into someone from church or the neighborhood. Because the question I dreaded most wasn't, "How are you?" It was, "Where are you staying?" And I didn't have an answer I was ready to say out loud. Ethan found me on day 5. I don't know how. I hadn't told him exactly where I was, just that I was figuring it out. But Ethan had this way of showing up exactly when you needed him, like he had some kind of radar for when people were falling apart. He appeared at the edge of the tree line just after sunset, carrying 2 Bojangles bags and a portable charging bank. "You look like hell," he said. I tried to smile. "Thanks. I'm serious, man. When's the last time you ate?" I didn't answer, mostly because I couldn't remember. Ethan sat down on the ground outside the tent and unpacked the bags. Chicken biscuits, fries, 2 sweet teas. He slid one of everything toward me and didn't say a word when I hesitated. "It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's partnership." "Partnership?" "Yeah." He pulled out a notebook, one of mine actually, that I'd left at his house weeks ago. "Because we're still doing this. The app, the business, all of it." I stared at him. "Ethan, I'm living in a torn tent behind a park. I can't—" "You can." He cut me off, his voice firm in a way I'd never heard before. "You think Steve Jobs had it easy? You think every entrepreneur started in a nice apartment with venture capital? Most of them started with nothing, and you've got something they didn't. What's that? Me." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I picked up the chicken biscuit and ate it in 4 bites, and for the first time in 5 days, the weight in my chest felt a little lighter. Ethan opened the notebook and clicked his pen. "Okay, let's talk about what we're actually building." The idea had started 6 months earlier, during a farmer's market downtown. We'd watched vendors, mostly older folks selling homemade jams, soaps, crafts, struggle to take payments. Some only accepted cash. Others had clunky square readers that barely worked. And all of them were invisible online. No websites, no social media. Just word of mouth and luck. What if, Ethan had said that day, we built an app that connected local vendors with customers, like Etsy, but hyper-local, Raleigh-specific, something that made it easy for people to find handmade goods in their own city. It sounded simple, but simple ideas, I was learning, were the hardest to execute. We'd spent months sketching features, researching competitors, teaching ourselves the basics of app development through YouTube tutorials and free coding boot camps. Ethan handled the technical side. I handled the business strategy, the marketing, the vision. And now, sitting in the dirt outside a torn tent with mosquitoes buzzing around us and the distant hum of a boat engine echoing across the lake, we were supposed to make it real. "We need a name," Ethan said, tapping the pen against the notebook. "Homegrown NC," I said, without thinking. He looked up. "That's actually perfect." "Yeah? Yeah, it's local. It's clear. It tells people exactly what we're about." He wrote it down in all caps at the top of the page. "Okay, now let's talk features." We worked until the flashlight battery died. 2 hours, maybe 3. Ethan sketching wireframes, Me outlining our target audience, our pitch to vendors, our revenue model. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a boardroom or a co-working space or even a coffee shop. It was a patch of dirt in the dark, with the smell of lake water and Waffle House floating through the trees. But it felt like progress. After Ethan left, I crawled into the tent and checked my phone. One new message. From my mother. I stared at the notification for a long time before opening it. Your father and I hope you're learning what the real world looks like. When you're ready to apologize and enroll at Duke, you know where to find us. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to memorize the feeling it gave me, the cold, detached cruelty of it, the assumption that I'd come crawling back, the certainty that I'd fail. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the Notes app and typed a single sentence. Prove them wrong. That became my mantra, my fuel, the thing I whispered to myself every morning when I woke up sore and exhausted, every night when I couldn't sleep because the heat or the fear or the loneliness was too much. Prove them wrong, not because I wanted their approval, but because I needed to know, needed to prove to myself that survival wasn't the ceiling. It was just the beginning. And as I lay in that torn tent, listening to the cicadas scream and the distant rush of traffic on Highway 1, I made a promise to the version of myself I was trying to become. I wouldn't just survive this. I'd rise from it. I need to take you back. Before the tent, before the rain, before my mother's hand on the deadbolt. Because the real break didn't happen when they kicked me out. It happened 2 days earlier, at the kitchen table, with Duke University brochures scattered across the surface like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to attend. It was a Tuesday morning, late May. The kind of morning where the humidity already pressed against the windows and the air conditioning hummed constantly just to keep the house livable. I'd come downstairs to make coffee and found both of my parents waiting for me. Not sitting, waiting. My father stood by the counter, arms crossed. My mother sat at the table, her hands folded like she was about to lead a prayer. And between them, spread out in a perfect fan, were glossy brochures with Duke University stamped across the front in royal blue letters. I knew immediately what this was. Sit down, Jason, my father said. Not good morning, not how'd you sleep? Just a command, delivered in the same tone he used when I was 12 and had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. I sat. My mother slid one of the brochures toward me. Your father and I have been talking. We've decided it's time to finalize your enrollment. Finalize, I repeated slowly. I didn't know we'd started. You were accepted, my father said. That's starting. I was accepted to a lot of schools. That doesn't mean I'm going. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My mother's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes shifted. Jason, honey, we've talked about this. Duke is an incredible opportunity. Do you know how many students would kill for the chance you're throwing away? I'm not throwing it away. I'm just postponing it. Postponing, my father said, and the way he repeated the word made it sound like a disease. For what exactly? I took a breath. This was the moment. The moment I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. Trying to find the right words, the right tone, the right argument that would make them understand. I want to take a year, I said carefully. 1 year to work on a business idea with Ethan. We've been developing an app. An app? My father laughed. Actually laughed. You want to delay your education for an app. It's not just an app. It's a platform that connects local vendors with customers. It solves a real problem, and we've already validated the concept with Jason. My mother's voice cut through mine like scissors through paper. Do you hear yourself? You sound like one of those kids on Shark Tank who thinks they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. Maybe I do, I said quietly. Would that be so bad? Yes. My father moved to the table and sat down across from me. It would. Because for every Zuckerberg, there are 10,000 kids who waste their potential chasing fantasies. And I didn't raise my son to be a statistic. You raised me to be obedient. The words came out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. And I sat there, my heart pounding, realizing I'd just said the one thing you weren't supposed to say in the Carter household. The truth? Obedient. My father's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you think this is? Obedience? I think you've made every major decision in my life since I was born. And now that I want to make one for myself, you're calling it a fantasy. Because it is a fantasy. His voice rose, sudden and sharp. You don't know the first thing about running a business. You don't have capital. You don't have experience. You don't even have a college degree, which, newsflash, Jason, is the bare minimum in the real world. Steve Jobs didn't finish college. Steve Jobs is dead. The words hit like a slap. My mother stood up, her chair scraping against the tile. Michael, that's enough. No, Denise, it's not enough. Our son is sitting here telling us he wants to throw away a full scholarship to Duke, to chase some pipe dream with a kid who can barely keep his GPA above a 3.0. Ethan's GPA doesn't define him, I said, my voice shaking. And neither does mine. Neither does a degree from a school you picked because it sounds impressive at church. My mother gasped. Actual, audible shock, like I'd just blasphemed. How dare you, she whispered. How dare I what? Tell the truth? Admit that every decision you've made for me has been about how it looks to other people? The clothes I wear, the activities I do, the school I'm supposed to attend. It's all been about your image, not my future. That is not fair. My mother's voice cracked. Everything we've done has been to give you opportunities we never had, to set you up for success. No, you've been setting me up to be a version of you, and I don't want that. The argument spiraled from there. My father paced. My mother cried. Not the real kind of crying, but the strategic kind. The kind designed to make you feel like a monster. And I sat at that table, trapped between their disappointment and my own desperation to be seen as something other than a project they'd invested 18 years into perfecting. You're embarrassing us, my mother said at one point, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Do you understand that? Our friends ask about you. The church asks about you. And what are we supposed to say? That our son is too good for Duke University? Tell them I'm building something, I said. Building what? My father snapped. An app? Jason, apps are a dime a dozen. Everyone thinks they're going to be the next big thing, and 99% of them fail within a year. You want to be part of that statistic? Fine. But don't expect us to fund your delusion. I'm not asking you to fund it. I'm asking you to give me time. Time is money. And money is something you clearly don't understand. I understand that money isn't the only thing that matters. Said like someone who's never had to worry about it. We went in circles for hours. Round and round, the same arguments dressed in different words. My father, listing all the ways I was being reckless. My mother, crying about how much they'd sacrificed. Me, trying to explain that I wasn't rejecting them, I was just choosing myself. But they didn't hear it that way. To them, choosing myself was the same as rejecting everything they'd built, their reputation, their plan, their control. By the end of the first day, I was exhausted. I went to bed thinking maybe we'd talk again in the morning. Maybe cooler heads would prevail. Maybe they'd see that I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was just trying to live. But the second day was worse, because my father had prepared. He sat me down at breakfast with printed spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, charts showing average startup failure rates, articles about students who delayed college and never went back, statistics about lifetime earnings with a degree versus without. This is reality, he said, sliding the papers across the table. Not your feelings, reality. I looked at the numbers. I looked at him, and I realized something that made my stomach turn. He wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to win. What are you so afraid of? I asked quietly. He blinked. Excuse me? What are you afraid of? That I'll fail? or that I'll succeed without needing you. For just a second, I saw something flicker across his face, something vulnerable, something almost human, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. You're a child, he said coldly. You don't get to psychoanalyze me. I'm 18, legally an adult. Then act like one. I am. That's why I'm making my own decisions. No. He stood up, his chair slamming backward. You're acting like a rebellious teenager who thinks he knows everything, and I'm done pretending this is a conversation. He walked out of the kitchen, and my mother looked at me with something I'd never seen before: disgust. You're tearing this family apart, she said softly. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just asking for space to figure out who I am. You're 18, Jason. You don't know who you are yet. Exactly. So let me find out. She shook her head. That's not how this works. You don't get to experiment with your future just because you saw some motivational video online. Real life has consequences. And then she said the sentence that broke everything. If you walk away from Duke, you're walking away from this family. I stared at her. You don't mean that. I do. Because if you make this choice, Jason, you're telling us that we don't matter, that everything we've done for you doesn't matter. And I won't sit here and watch you destroy yourself just to prove a point. My hands were shaking. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. It's my life. She looked at me for a long time, and then she stood up. Not under this roof. It's not. That night, my father barely spoke to me. He moved through the house like I was already gone. And the next morning, the trash bags appeared. Because to them, loving me meant controlling me. And the moment I tried to take that control back, I stopped being their son. I became a problem that needed to be removed. Building something from nothing sounds romantic until you're actually doing it. Then it's just exhausting. Ethan showed up every day, sometimes twice. He'd come after his shift at the Smoothie King on Hillsborough Street, smelling like strawberries and protein powder, carrying his laptop in a backpack held together with safety pins. We'd sit outside the tent, screens glowing in the dark, coding until the battery warnings started flashing. The app was taking shape. Slowly, painfully, but it was real. We'd divided responsibilities. Ethan handled the back end, the database, the payment processing, the infrastructure that made everything actually work. I focused on design, user experience, and the business side. Who were we targeting? How would we pitch vendors? What made us different from every other marketplace app already out there? The answer, we decided, was trust. Big platforms were anonymous. A faceless vendor in another state shipping you something you hoped would match the photos. But homegrown NC would be different. Every vendor would be local, verified, connected to a real person in a real community. You weren't buying from a stranger on the internet. You were buying from Linda down the street who made candles in her garage, or Marcus who built furniture in his barn outside Clayton. It was Etsy meets next door with a North Carolina soul. People want to know where their money goes, I said one night, sketching mock-ups on a legal pad by flashlight. They want to feel like they're supporting real people, not corporations. Ethan nodded, typing without looking up. So we make the vendor profiles personal, photos, stories, maybe even video introductions. Exactly. Make it human. The work was the only thing keeping me sane, because the living situation was getting worse. The heat in July was unbearable, the kind of heat that turned the inside of the tent into a humid oven by 10 a.m. and didn't let up until after midnight. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, my shirt stuck to my back, my head pounding from dehydration. The gallon jugs of water I bought from the gas station never lasted as long as I needed them to. And the bugs. God, the bugs. Mosquitoes, flies, ants that found their way into everything. I'd wake up with bites covering my arms and legs, angry red welts that itched so badly I'd scratch them raw. I tried bug spray, but the cheap stuff from the dollar store barely worked, and the good stuff was too expensive. Money was disappearing faster than I'd expected. Gym passes, food, phone bill, charging banks. Every expense felt like a countdown timer, and I was running out of time. I'd started skipping meals, not intentionally, but strategically. One meal a day was enough if I drank enough water. 2 meals felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Ethan noticed. "You're losing weight," he said one evening, handing me a Chick-fil-A bag. "I'm fine." "Jason, you're not fine. You look like you haven't eaten in 3 days." "2 days," I corrected. "And I'm fine." He didn't push. He just set the bag down and waited until I picked it up. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the heat or the bugs. It was the uncertainty. Every morning, I woke up wondering if this would be the day someone found me. A ranger, a cop, a parks employee doing maintenance. I'd hear footsteps on the trail and my heart would stop. I'd see flashlights through the trees and hold my breath, waiting to be discovered. Because the truth was, I wasn't supposed to be there. Lake Wheeler Park closed at sunset. Camping wasn't allowed. And if someone official found me, I'd have nowhere else to go. The storm hit on a Wednesday night. I'd seen the weather forecast earlier that day. Thunderstorms, possible hail, severe wind warnings, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I reinforced the tent as best I could, tightened the stakes, piled rocks around the base, moved my laptop and notebooks into a trash bag and sealed it tight. And then I waited. The wind came first. Not a breeze, a wall. It hit the tent like a freight train, and suddenly the whole structure was shaking, the fabric snapping violently against the poles. Rain followed seconds later, sheets of it so thick I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. I crouched in the center of the tent, one hand on a support pole, trying to keep the whole thing from collapsing. Water poured through the torn back panel, soaking the sleeping bag, the clothes, everything I owned. Thunder cracked so loud I felt it in my chest. And then, the lightning. It lit up the inside of the tent like a camera flash, and for a split second I saw everything clearly. The water pooling on the floor, the ripped seams spreading wider, the way the poles were bending under the pressure. This tent wasn't going to survive the night, and neither was I if I stayed in it. I grabbed the trash bag with my electronics, threw it over my shoulder, and ran. Not toward the road, toward the bathroom building near the boat launch. It was a quarter-mile away, maybe less, but in the dark and the rain, it felt like a marathon. My feet slipped in the mud. Branches whipped across my face. The wind tried to rip the bag from my hands, but I made it. The bathroom was unlocked, thank God, and I shoved my way inside, slamming the door against the wind. The lights were off. The air smelled like mildew and industrial cleaner, but it was dry, and it was shelter. I collapsed against the wall, soaking wet and shaking, and tried not to think about what I'd left behind. The storm lasted 3 hours. By the time it passed, it was nearly 2 in the morning. I walked back to the campsite with a flashlight Ethan had left me, dreading what I'd find. The tent was destroyed. One of the poles had snapped. The fabric was half submerged in mud. Everything inside was soaked. Clothes, sleeping bag, notebooks. I pulled out what I could salvage, but most of it was ruined. I sat down in the mud and stared at the wreckage. This was rock bottom. Not the day my parents kicked me out. Not the nights I'd gone hungry. This. Sitting in the dark, surrounded by the ruins of the only shelter I had, realizing that survival wasn't a sprint. It was a war of attrition, and I was losing. 2 days later, a park ranger found me. I was trying to dry my clothes on low-hanging branches when he appeared on the trail, khaki uniform and Wake County Parks badge glinting in the morning sun. He was older, maybe 50, with the kind face of someone who'd seen this before. "You staying out here, son?" he asked. I thought about lying, but I was too tired. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "How long?" "Few weeks. You know camping's not allowed after dark." "I know." He looked at the broken tent, at my mud-stained clothes, at me. You got family? Not really. He sighed. Look, I'm not going to report you, but you can't stay here much longer. Winter's coming, and you won't survive a December night in a tent. You understand that? I nodded. Find somewhere else. Shelter, maybe. Friend's couch. Anything but this. He handed me a business card with homeless resources printed on the back. Good luck, kid. He walked away before I could respond. That night, Ethan and I sat outside what was left of my camp, and I told him everything. The storm, the ranger, the warning. You can stay with me, Ethan said immediately. Your parents won't allow that. I'll figure it out. Ethan, you can't risk... Jason. He grabbed my shoulder, forcing me to look at him. We're in this together, you and me. That was the deal. And I'm not letting you freeze to death out here because you're too proud to ask for help. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. And Ethan pulled out his laptop. Okay, we've got maybe 3 months before winter hits. That's 3 months to launch this app, get traction, and prove that this wasn't for nothing. 3 months, I repeated. 3 months. Can we do it? I looked at the torn tent, at the mud-stained notebook with our business plan sketched inside, at Ethan, who'd shown up every single day, who believed in me when no one else did, and I felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Determination. Yeah, I said quietly. We can do it. Ethan grinned and opened a new document on his screen. Then let's build something they can't ignore. And under the humid North Carolina sky, with mosquitoes buzzing and distant boat engines humming across the water, we got back to work. Because the environment could break my shelter, but it couldn't break my dream. Not yet. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for months, was that my mother never stopped watching. I thought leaving meant leaving. That when they shut that door, when they dropped those trash bags on the porch, they'd washed their hands of me completely. That I'd become a cautionary tale they'd tell at church, a mistake they'd quietly erase from holiday cards and family photos. I was wrong, because my mother had created a burner Instagram account 3 days after kicking me out. Not under her real name, not with her photo. Just a generic username, NCE Community Mom, with a profile picture of a sunset and a bio that said, Proud North Carolinian. And she followed me. I'd kept my Instagram public. Mostly because I wasn't thinking about privacy. I was thinking about survival. I'd post updates about the app development, screenshots of progress, motivational quotes I found that kept me going. Nothing personal. Nothing that showed where I was sleeping or how I was living. But my mother saw all of it. Every story, every post, every small victory I shared with the 15 followers who actually cared. She watched like someone watches a car accident, unable to look away, even though every image must have confirmed the choice she'd made. I found out later, much later, that she'd sit in the living room after my father went to bed, phone glowing in the dark, scrolling through my life like it was a reality show she couldn't cancel. She'd zoom in on photos, looking for clues. Was I eating enough? Where was I staying? Who was helping me? And every time she saw evidence that I was surviving without them, something inside her twisted. Not guilt, resentment. Because my survival meant she'd been wrong. And being wrong wasn't something Denise Carter could afford to be. Not in front of the church ladies who asked about me. Not in front of the neighbors who'd watched me leave with trash bags. Not in front of my father, who'd made the final call to remove me from the house. So instead of admitting the mistake, she doubled down. She convinced herself that I was faking it, that someone else was funding me, that the progress I posted online was exaggerated, performative, designed to make them feel guilty. He's doing this for attention, she told my father one night over dinner. At least, that's what he told me years later during the one conversation we had after everything fell apart. My father had looked up from his plate. Doing what? Posting all over social media, acting like he's some kind of entrepreneur. It's embarrassing. My father didn't respond immediately, He chewed slowly, methodically, the way he did everything. And then he set down his fork. "He's got over 1,000 followers now," he said quietly. My mother froze. "What?" "His Instagram, I checked. 1,000 followers. And he's posted about some app he's building with that Miles kid. Let me see." My father pulled out his phone, because apparently he'd been watching too. Not with a burner account. Just from his regular profile, lurking silently, never liking or commenting, just observing from a distance. He showed her a post I'd made the week before. A screenshot of our app's landing page with the caption, "3 months of work, one vision. Homegrown NC launches soon." My mother stared at it. "He can't be serious." "He looks serious." "Michael, he's living in a tent. How is he building an app from a tent?" My father shrugged. "The Miles kid probably has a computer. They're probably using coffee shop Wi-Fi or something." And that's when my mother said the sentence that revealed everything about who she really was. "We can't let him think he made the right choice." My father looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if he actually succeeds, even a little bit, he'll never come back. He'll think he didn't need us, that he was right to walk away. Denise, he didn't walk away. We kicked him out because he was being disrespectful." Her voice rose, defensive and sharp. "He disrespected this family, Michael. He chose some fantasy over the future we'd planned for him." "Maybe it wasn't a fantasy." The room went silent. My mother stared at my father like he'd just committed treason. "Are you defending him?" "I'm saying maybe we were too harsh." "Too harsh?" She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "We gave him everything, everything, and he threw it in our faces. And now you're sitting here telling me we were too harsh?" My father didn't answer. He just looked down at his plate. And my mother walked out of the room. But she didn't stop watching. If anything, she watched more closely, obsessively. She'd check my profile multiple times a day, refreshing it like she was expecting me to post a confession, an apology, a public admission that I'd failed. It never came. Instead, I kept posting progress, small wins, vendor sign-ups, beta testers. Every post was a tiny dagger, proof that I was moving forward without their permission. And my mother started preparing her defense. She rehearsed it in the mirror. I know because my father told me. He'd walk past the bathroom and hear her practicing what she'd say if someone asked about me. "Oh, Jason, he's figuring himself out. We're giving him space to grow." Not, "We kicked him out." Not, "We chose our pride over our son." Just a sanitized version of the truth, wrapped in fake concern and motherly wisdom. She even crafted a story for the church. When someone asked, and someone always asked, she'd smile sadly and say, "Jason decided to take a gap year to explore entrepreneurship. We're supporting his journey, even though we wish he'd chosen differently." Supporting. The word made my father sick, he told me later. But he didn't correct her. He just stood beside her and nodded, playing his role in the performance. Because admitting what they'd really done would mean admitting they'd been cruel. And cruelty required justification. So they justified. They told themselves I was ungrateful, delusional, naive. They convinced themselves that tough love was still love, that consequences were the same as care. They built a narrative where they were the victims, good parents betrayed by a rebellious son who didn't appreciate their sacrifices. And the more they told that story, the more they believed it. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the performance was over, my mother would sit in the dark and scroll through my Instagram. And sometimes, just sometimes, her thumb would hover over the message button. She'd stare at it, thinking about what she'd say, wondering if I'd even respond. But she never pressed it, because reaching out would mean admitting she cared. And caring would mean admitting she'd been wrong. Meanwhile, I had no idea they were watching. I thought I was invisible to them, a ghost they'd exorcised from their perfect life. I kept building, kept surviving, kept pushing forward, Not because I thought they'd notice, but because I didn't have any other choice. And that's the thing about people who need control. They can't let go, even when they've pushed you away. They hover, they monitor, they wait for you to fail so they can feel justified in what they did. But what happens when you don't fail? What happens when the child they threw away starts to rise? That's when the real test begins. Not for the child, for the parents, because the question stops being, will he survive without us? And becomes, can we survive watching him succeed without our approval? And as my mother sat in that dark living room, watching my life through a screen, that question must have kept her awake, because the answer was becoming clearer every day. I didn't need them. I never really did. What I needed was someone who believed in me more than they believed in their own comfort. Someone like Ethan, someone who showed up. And my parents? They were just spectators now, watching from the cheap seats, waiting for a failure that wasn't coming. The call came at 6 in the morning. I was half asleep in the tent, or what was left of it after Ethan and I had patched the worst tears with duct tape and prayer, when my phone started buzzing. Not once, not twice, continuously, like someone was holding down the call button and refusing to let go. I fumbled for it in the dark. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. Hello? My voice came out scratchy, confused. Jason. Jason, are you awake? I am now. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Check your email. Check it right now. I sat up, suddenly alert. What happened? Just check. He hung up. I opened my email app, and my stomach dropped. 43 unread messages. Most of them with subject lines I didn't understand. Vendor inquiry, partnership opportunity, feature request, love your app. I scrolled, my heart pounding harder with every new message. They were from vendors, real vendors, people I'd never met, asking how to get listed on Homegrown NC, asking when we were launching citywide, asking if we accepted vendors from Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary. What the hell is happening? I whispered to no one. I called Ethan back. He answered before the first ring finished. You see it? I see emails. I don't understand. TikTok, Jason. Someone made a TikTok about us. My brain stalled. What? A vendor. The candle lady from the farmer's market, Linda something. She posted a video yesterday afternoon showing how she uploaded her products to our app. It went viral overnight, like actually viral, 500,000 views. I couldn't breathe. I downloaded TikTok, something I'd never had time or money to waste on before, and searched Homegrown NC. The video was right there at the top. Linda Pritchard, the woman who sold lavender candles at the State Farmers Market, standing in her garage workshop, holding her phone up to the camera. The caption read, "Finally, an app that lets me sell local without the big corporate fees. North Carolina, we eating good now." She walked viewers through the whole process, uploading photos, setting prices, writing her story. The app looked clean, professional, real, and the comments section was exploding. Where can I download this? Is this only Raleigh or statewide? We need this in Charlotte ASAP. This is exactly what small businesses need. The boys who made this are geniuses. I scrolled until my thumb went numb. 500,000 views, 12,000 likes, 3,000 shares, and growing. Ethan, I said slowly, we're not ready for this. I know. We haven't even officially launched. I know. The payment system is still in beta. The vendor verification process isn't. Jason. His voice was steady, calm. We're as ready as we're ever going to be. This is what we built for. He was right. We'd spent 3 months designing an app for local vendors to connect with local customers. And now, because one person loved it enough to share it, the entire state was paying attention. This was the moment. The only question was whether we could handle it. By 9 a.m., we had 57 vendor applications. By noon, 112. By sunset, over 300. Ethan and I spent the entire day in panic mode, approving vendors, fixing bugs, upgrading our server capacity with money we didn't have, but somehow scraped together. We worked through meals, through exhaustion, through the surreal feeling that our lives had just changed overnight. Because they had. The real turning point came 3 days later. I was at the library, my new workspace since the tent had become unbearable in the August heat, when my phone rang. Unknown number, North Carolina area code. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Hi, is this Jason Carter? The voice was professional. Female. Confident. Yes, this is Jason. My name is Rebecca Mills. I'm a producer with WRL News. We'd love to do a story on you and your app. Would you be available for an interview? I froze. Bural. The biggest news station in the Triangle. The station my parents watched every morning while they drank coffee and critiqued the anchors' wardrobes. An interview? I repeated dumbly. Yes, we're doing a segment on young entrepreneurs making an impact in local communities. Your story seems like a perfect fit. We could film tomorrow if you're available. Tomorrow. I looked down at my clothes. The same hoodie I'd been wearing for a week. Jeans with mud stains I couldn't scrub out. Sneakers held together with duct tape. This was not how you appeared on television. But I said yes anyway, because opportunities like this didn't come twice. Ethan and I met the news crew at Pullen Park the next afternoon. Rebecca Mills was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with the kind of energy that made you want to trust her immediately. She had a cameraman with her, a quiet guy named Derek, who set up equipment while Rebecca asked us preliminary questions. So, she said, pen poised over a notepad, tell me your story. How did Homegrown NC start? I glanced at Ethan. He nodded, and I told her everything. Not the sanitized version, not the version my parents would want people to hear. The real version. I told her about the argument, the ultimatum, the trash bags on the porch, the tent behind Lake Wheeler, the storms, the hunger, the fear that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And then I told her about Ethan, about the nights we spent coding under a flashlight, about the vendors who believed in us before we believed in ourselves, about the moment we realized we weren't just building an app, we were building a community. Rebecca's pen moved faster the longer I talked. When I finished, she looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in months. Respect. That's an incredible story, Jason, she said softly. How old are you? 18. And you built this entire platform in 3 months while living in a tent. We built it, I corrected, nodding toward Ethan. I couldn't have done this alone. Ethan smiled. He's being modest. This was his vision. I just made it work. The interview itself was a blur. Rebecca asked questions. I answered them as honestly as I could. The camera's red light blinked at me like a tiny, judgmental eye, and I tried not to think about who might be watching when this aired. What would you say to other young people who want to pursue their dreams but face opposition from family? Rebecca asked at one point. I hesitated. Because this was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been asking myself every night in that tent. The one that kept me awake when the mosquitoes finally stopped biting and the heat finally broke and I was left alone with my thoughts. I'd say, I took a breath, I'd say that your life is yours, not theirs. And if the people who are supposed to support you can't see your vision, that doesn't make your vision wrong. It just means you have to fight harder to prove it. My voice cracked on the last word. I felt it happening before I could stop it. The tears, hot and sudden and completely humiliating. I blinked hard, trying to force them back, but one slipped down my cheek anyway. Rebecca didn't look away. She didn't tell Derek to stop filming. She just leaned forward slightly, her expression soft. It's okay, she said quietly. You've been through a lot. I nodded, unable to speak. Because she was right. I had been through a lot. And for the first time since my mother slammed that door, someone was acknowledging it. The interview aired 2 days later. I watched it at the library on my phone, headphones in, heart pounding. They'd edited it down to a 6-minute segment, complete with B-roll of the app interface, shots of local vendors using the platform, and my interview. They kept the moment I cried. Not in a exploitative way, just honest, real. A kid who'd been through hell, talking about survival. The anchor introduced it as a local teen's dream becomes reality despite impossible odds. Within an hour, my phone exploded. Messages, emails, calls, social media notifications I couldn't keep up with. People congratulating me, vendors thanking me, strangers telling me I'd inspired them. I scrolled through them, my hands shaking. 100 messages, 200, 300. Former classmates I hadn't talked to in years, teachers, neighbours, people from church. Everyone, it seemed, had seen the interview. Everyone except the two people I'd unconsciously been waiting to hear from. My parents. Not a text, not a call, not even a passive-aggressive email. Just silence. And somehow, that silence told me everything I needed to know. The investor calls started the next morning. First, a venture capital firm in Charlotte, then an angel investor in Atlanta, then someone from a Raleigh-based startup incubator who wanted to meet as soon as possible. Ethan and I sat in a Panera Bread, laptops open, trying to process what was happening. "This is insane," Ethan said for the 5th time. "We're getting actual investment interest, like real money." "We don't even have a business plan," I said. "We have 3 months of revenue data. That's better than a business plan." He was right. The vendors were paying small monthly subscription fees, $10 for basic listings, $25 for premium. It wasn't much per vendor, but with over 400 vendors signed up, it was adding up. We weren't rich, but we weren't failing either. "We need to be smart about this," I said slowly. "If we take investment, we lose control. If we don't take investment, we can't scale. Can't we bootstrap it?" "Jason." Ethan closed his laptop. "3 months ago, you were living in a tent. Now we're being courted by investors. This is the dream. Don't overthink it." But overthinking was all I knew how to do. Because success, I was learning, came with its own kind of fear. Not the fear of failure. I'd lived with that for months. But the fear of success. The fear of proving everyone wrong. The fear of reaching a point where my parents couldn't hurt me anymore, because I'd outgrown their approval entirely. And that fear felt strangely like grief. That night, I walked to the street where I'd been kicked out. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it, to remind myself of where I'd started, to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the distance I'd traveled. I stood on the sidewalk across from the house. The porch light was on, warm, bright, exactly like it had been that night in the rain. But I wasn't the same person who'd stood there 3 months ago. I pulled out my phone and opened the congratulatory messages one more time. I scrolled through them slowly, reading names, absorbing kindness. And then I realized something that made my chest tighten. I didn't need their approval anymore. My parents, their validation, their pride. The thing I'd spent 18 years chasing. The thing I thought I needed to feel whole. I didn't need it anymore. Because I'd proven something more important. I'd proven it to myself. And as I turned away from that house, away from the porch light, away from the people who'd chosen control over love, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. Real, terrifying, beautiful freedom. The question now wasn't whether I could survive without them. It was whether they could survive watching me thrive. And as my phone buzzed with another investor inquiry, I realized something that changed everything. I didn't care about the answer anymore. My parents found out the same way everyone else did, through a neighbor. Mrs. Patterson knocked on their door at 8:15 on a Thursday morning, holding her phone like it was evidence in a trial. My mother answered, still in her bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, the kind of Thursday morning that used to feel routine before everything changed. "Denise," Mrs. Patterson said, slightly breathless. Have you seen the news? My mother blinked. What news? About Jason. The coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Mrs. Patterson didn't wait for permission. She just turned her phone around and pressed play on the WRAL segment. Right there on the front porch, with morning sun cutting through the trees and birds chirping like nothing was wrong, my mother watched her son's face fill the screen. She watched me talk about the app, about the dream, about the tent, and she watched me cry. Mrs. Patterson was saying something, chattering about how inspiring it was, how proud they must be, how the whole neighborhood was talking about it, but my mother wasn't listening. She was staring at the phone, at my face, at the version of me she hadn't seen in 3 months. I looked thinner, older, tired in a way that 18-year-olds shouldn't look tired, but I also looked determined. That's really something, my mother managed to say, her voice hollow. Mrs. Patterson beamed. You raised an incredible young man, Denise. You must be so proud. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. Yes, proud. Well, I just wanted to make sure you'd seen it. Everyone's sharing it on Facebook. It's all over the community pages. She started to leave, then turned back. Oh, and tell Jason congratulations from us, will you? My mother nodded mutely. The door closed. She stood there for a long moment, phone still in her hand, coffee growing cold. And then my father's voice came from the living room. Who was that? She didn't answer. She just walked to where he sat reading the paper, the physical paper, because Michael Carter believed screens at breakfast were a sign of declining civilization, and handed him her phone. Watch this. My father looked at her, then at the phone. He pressed play. 6 minutes later, he set the phone down on the coffee table like it might explode. The house was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street. When did this air? My father asked quietly. 2 days ago, apparently. 2 days. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at nothing. The whole neighborhood has seen this. Michael. The whole neighborhood, Denise. They've seen our son on television talking about how we kicked him out, how he's been living in a tent. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. Do you understand what that means? My mother's face flushed. What it means is that he's airing our private family business on local news for everyone to judge. Is that really what you took from that? What else am I supposed to take from it? He made us look exactly like what we are. My father turned to face her, and something in his expression had shifted. We kicked our son out, Denise, and now everyone knows. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother set her coffee cup down with a sharp click. We made a difficult parenting decision. We set a boundary. That's not the same as he was living in a tent, by his choice, because we gave him no other option. We gave him an option. Her voice rose, cracking at the edges. Duke University, a full scholarship, a future, and he spat in our faces. My father didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her with something that might have been disappointment, or exhaustion, or both. He built something, he said finally. Did you see that? He actually built something, while living in a tent. While we... He stopped himself. While we what? My mother demanded. While we sat here convincing ourselves we'd done the right thing. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Not the strategic kind, the real kind. The kind that came when your narrative started cracking and you couldn't hold it together anymore. Don't do this, Michael. Don't make me the villain. I'm not making you anything. I'm just saying maybe we were wrong. We weren't wrong. We were protecting him from making a massive mistake. Denise. He walked over to the coffee table, picked up her phone, pulled up the video again. Does this look like a mistake to you? She didn't answer. She just stared at the frozen image of my face on the screen, the moment right before I started crying, when I was talking about vision and fighting and proving yourself. Behind me in the shot, barely visible, was the Welcome to Raleigh sign at Pullen Park. The same park where they used to take me when I was little, where my father taught me to ride a bike, where my mother used to pack elaborate picnic lunches and take photos for the Christmas card. I'd been in their city the whole time, close enough to visit, close enough to help. They just chose not to. "What do we do?" my mother whispered. My father sat down heavily on the couch. "I don't know. Should we reach out? And say what?" She looked at him desperately. "That we're proud of him? Are we?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not whether they should reach out, but whether they were actually proud or just embarrassed that everyone was watching. My father picked up the remote and turned on the TV. The morning news. Different stories, weather, traffic. A cooking segment about fall recipes. Normal life, continuing like nothing had changed, except everything had changed. They spent the rest of the morning in separate rooms. My mother, on her phone, drafting and deleting text messages she didn't have the courage to send. My father, in his study, staring at spreadsheets he wasn't actually reading. And around lunchtime, when my mother finally worked up the nerve to compose a message, her hands were shaking. She wrote, "Jason, we saw your interview. Deleted it. Too casual. Jason, your father and I saw your news segment. Deleted it. Too formal. Jason, we want you to know we're proud of what you've accomplished. Deleted it. Too dishonest." She must have written and deleted 20 versions before finally settling on something that felt true enough to send but vague enough to protect her pride. "Jason, we saw you on WRL. What you've built is impressive. We've been thinking about you. If you want to talk, we're here. We never stopped being your parents. Love, Mom." She read it 5 times before pressing send. The message delivered. Read receipt. On. She watched the screen, waiting for the 3 dots that meant I was typing back. Waiting for something. Anything. But the dots never appeared. I saw the message at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was at Ethan's house. His parents had finally agreed to let me crash in their guest room for a few weeks while I figured out more permanent housing. I'd just finished a call with an investor from Atlanta, and I was riding the high of it when my phone buzzed. "Mom." The notification made my stomach drop. I stared at it for a long time, long enough that Ethan noticed. "You good?" he asked from across the room. "My mom texted." He looked up sharply. "What did she say?" "I don't know. I haven't opened it." "You gonna?" That was the question. Opening it meant engaging. Responding meant forgiving, or at least acknowledging that forgiveness was possible. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. Didn't know if I'd ever be ready, because the wound was still too fresh. The memory of that door slamming, the rain, the trash bags, the nights I'd gone hungry, the mornings I'd woken up not knowing if I'd survive another day. They'd put me through that. Not the world, not bad luck. Them. "I don't know," I said finally. Ethan nodded slowly. "You don't have to decide right now. They saw the interview. That's why she's reaching out. Not because they actually care. Because everyone else saw it. Maybe. Or maybe seeing you on TV made them realize what they did. Or maybe they just don't want to look bad at church on Sunday." Ethan didn't argue. He just came over and sat next to me. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "I'm with you. If you want to respond, respond. If you want to delete it and pretend it never came, do that. This is your call, man, not theirs." I looked at the notification again. That little grey box with my mother's name inside it. 3 months ago, I would have opened it immediately. 3 months ago, I would have been desperate for any sign that they cared. But I wasn't that person anymore. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. "I'm not ready," I said. And Ethan just nodded. Because the truth was, forgiveness wasn't something you owed people just because they asked for it. It was something you gave when you were ready, if you were ever ready. And as that message sat unread on my phone, growing older with every passing hour, I realized something important. My healing didn't require their participation. They could watch from a distance. They could send messages. They could tell themselves whatever story helped them sleep at night. But I didn't owe them absolution. Not after what they'd put me through. And maybe, just maybe, letting them sit with that uncertainty, that unanswered message, that possibility that I might never respond at all. Maybe that was the consequence they'd earned. 3 weeks after my mother's message, I stood on Shadowwood Drive again. Same street, same house. Same porch light glowing warm against the November dusk. But I was different. I'd come alone. Not because Ethan hadn't offered, he always offered, but because this was something I needed to do by myself. A pilgrimage, maybe, or an exorcism. I wasn't entirely sure which. The air was cooler now. Fall in North Carolina meant the humidity finally broke, replaced by crisp evenings that smelled like wood smoke and dying leaves. I wore a jacket I'd bought 2 weeks earlier, the first new piece of clothing I'd purchased in months. It still had the tags on it that morning. I'd cut them off in Ethan's bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, wondering who I'd become. Not the kid who left. That much was certain. The house looked exactly the same. White columns, trimmed hedges, American flag by the mailbox, probably replaced recently knowing my father. The kind of house that told the world, everything here is under control. But I knew the truth now. Control was just fear dressed up as authority. I'd parked my car, not borrowed, actually mine, 2 houses down. A used Honda Civic I'd bought after the first investor check cleared. It wasn't fancy. The AC was broken and the radio only worked on AM stations. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned, from a business I'd built, with my own 2 hands and a dream nobody believed in. Well, almost nobody. The last 3 weeks had been a blur of meetings, contracts, press interviews, and late nights coding features we'd promised investors we could deliver. Homegrown in C had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. 2,000 vendors across North Carolina. 50,000 users. Revenue that actually covered our costs, and then some. We weren't rich, but we weren't starving either. And more importantly, we'd proven something that couldn't be measured in downloads or dollars. We'd proven that being told no doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it just means you're ahead. I walked slowly toward the house. My sneakers, new ones, also purchased that week, crunching against the fallen leaves scattered across the sidewalk. The sound felt too loud in the quiet suburb. Too intrusive. Like I was disturbing something that had moved on without me. Maybe it had. Mrs. Patterson's house was dark. Either she wasn't home or she'd learned not to watch this time. The other neighbors' houses glowed with the blue flicker of televisions and the warm yellow of dinner being served. Normal life. The kind of normal I used to have. I didn't miss it. I stopped at the edge of their driveway, close enough to see movement through the living room window. 2 figures. My parents sitting on the couch. My father reading something on his tablet. My mother staring at her phone, probably scrolling, probably looking at things that didn't matter, probably doing anything to avoid talking about the thing they never talked about. Me. I wondered if they knew I'd never responded to the text. I wondered if they checked every day, hoping for a reply that would never come. I wondered if they told people I'd forgiven them, even though I hadn't. Even though forgiveness required asking, and they'd only offered excuses wrapped in carefully worded messages. The front door was 20 feet away. I could knock, I could ring the bell, I could stand on that porch and wait for them to answer, just like I'd waited that night in the rain, except this time I'd be the one with the power. The power to forgive or withhold forgiveness. The power to accept or reject their narrative. The power to decide whether they got to be part of my story going forward. But that's the thing about power. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the chance to use it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the business notebook, the one I'd carried with me that night, the one Ethan had written in under a flashlight, the one that survived the storm and the tent and every impossible night when I thought I wouldn't make it. I opened it to the first page where I'd written that initial mission statement: homegrown in sea, connecting communities, supporting local, building something real. Underneath, in Ethan's handwriting, "We got this." And underneath that, in my own shaky letters from a particularly dark night, "Prove them wrong." I'd done it. I'd actually done it. Not perfectly, not easily, not in the way anyone expected, but I'd survived. I'd built something. I'd turned pain into purpose and rejection into fuel. And the craziest part, I didn't need them to acknowledge it anymore. 3 months ago, standing on this same street with trash bags at my feet, I would have done anything for their approval. Their pride, some sign that I mattered more than their image. But now, standing here with a car, a business, a future I'd built myself, I realized their approval was the wrong prize. Because you can't get validation from people who are never capable of giving it. My mother once said, "Adults don't get choices they can't handle." She was wrong. Adults don't get to control other people's choices just because they're afraid of what those choices say about them. I closed the notebook and put it back in my pocket. And then I did something I'd been practicing in my head for 3 weeks but still wasn't sure I had the courage to do. I whispered the same words I'd whispered that night in the rain. But this time, they didn't sound desperate. They sounded free. It's my life. 3 words. Simple, obvious, the kind of thing every teenager says at some point. But saying them here, on this street, standing where my parents had tried to break me, saying them now meant something different. It meant I'd won. Not against them. Against the version of myself that thought I needed their permission to exist. I looked at the house one last time. At the porch light. At the windows glowing warm against the darkening sky. At the life continuing inside without me. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just distance. The kind of distance that comes when you've finally stopped letting other people define your worth. I turned and walked back toward my car, past Mrs. Patterson's house, past the mailbox with the flag raised, my mother's letter inside, probably. Another message I'd never read. Another attempt to rewrite history without actually apologizing for it. Past the street where I used to ride my bike as a kid, back when I thought parents were infallible and family was forever. Past all of it. When I reached my car, I paused with my hand on the door handle. There was a part of me, small but persistent, that wondered if I should have knocked. If I should have given them the chance to say whatever they'd been rehearsing. If closure required confrontation. But then I thought about something Ethan had said a few days earlier, when I told him I was thinking about coming here. You don't owe them a performance, man. You don't owe them anything. He was right. I didn't owe them my forgiveness. I didn't owe them my anger. I didn't even owe them an explanation for my absence. All I owed was myself, and I'd already given myself what I needed: freedom. I got in the car and started the engine. The radio crackled to life, some AM talk show host discussing local politics. I turned it off. The silence felt better. As I pulled away from Shadowwood Drive, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house was still there, still perfect, still glowing, but I wasn't looking back anymore. The investor from Atlanta had offered us $250,000 to scale statewide. We'd accepted. The contract was signed. The money would hit our account next week, and suddenly, Ethan and I would be responsible for building something 10 times bigger than what we'd already created. It was terrifying, exciting, impossible. Exactly the kind of thing my parents said I couldn't handle. I thought about calling Ethan, telling him I'd done it, that I'd gone back and survived the encounter with my own history. But I didn't. Not yet. Because this moment, This quiet drive-through rally as the streetlights flickered on and the sky turned deep purple. This moment was mine, and I wanted to hold on to it a little longer. There's this thing that happens when you survive something you weren't supposed to survive. You realize that the people who tried to break you were never as powerful as they seemed. They were just scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of being wrong. Scared of what it would mean if you succeeded without them. And their fear became your prison, until the day you stopped asking for their permission to leave. I drove past Lake Wheeler Park, where my tent had been. Past the gym where I'd showered. Past the library where I'd built a business from nothing but Wi-Fi and determination. Past all the places that had seen me at my lowest. And I realized something that made my throat tight. I'd miss those places. Not because the struggle was beautiful. It wasn't. It was brutal and dehumanizing and something no kid should have to endure. But because those places taught me something my parents never could. That survival is a skill. That resilience is a choice. That the distance between who you are and who you want to become is measured in how many times you're willing to get back up. And I'd gotten back up every single time. I pulled into Ethan's driveway just as the sun disappeared completely. The porch light was on, a warm, welcoming glow that looked nothing like the light at my parents' house. Because this light didn't come with conditions. It just said, "You're home. You're safe. You're enough." Ethan opened the door before I could knock. "You went, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. "You knock?" I shook my head. He smiled. "Good." And that was all that needed to be said. Because the people who really love you don't need you to perform your healing. They just need you to be okay. That night, I finally opened the Notes app on my phone and wrote something I'd been avoiding for 3 months. What becomes of a family built on control? It collapses, not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly, as the child they tried to own becomes someone they can no longer reach. And the question isn't whether I'll forgive them someday. The question is whether forgiveness even matters when you've already set yourself free. I stared at the words for a long time, and then I added one more line. If your freedom comes at the cost of family, would you still choose it? The answer, I was learning, wasn't simple, because freedom always costs something. And sometimes, what it costs is the fantasy that the people who hurt you will ever truly understand what they did. But here's what I know now. You can grieve what you lost and celebrate what you became. You can acknowledge the wound and still refuse to let it define you. You can walk away from people you love when staying would mean abandoning yourself. And you can stand on the street where they broke you. Look at the pieces they left behind and realize that you built something better from the wreckage. Something they can never take away. Something that was always yours. My name is Jason Carter. I'm 19 years old, and I survived the people who were supposed to protect me. That's not the ending I wanted, but it's the truth I earned. And sometimes, the truth is the only closure you get. If you believe no child should be punished for having their own dreams, hit like to stand against parents who choose control over love. Subscribe if you'd rather support those brave enough to walk away from toxic approval and build something real. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that freedom, real freedom, is worth more than conditional acceptance. Because sometimes, the family you choose is the one that actually shows up.